lovely people. Hope you're doing marvelously well. As ever, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and guess what? You'll be notified when we have a new video. So today I want to talk about 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco. Is that right, Eric?
Something like that.
Something like that. 5. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different techniques of using EQ. So let's start with the bass. Here's the final sound. Got some saturation on it. It's got a good low end. Now, what are the main components that are creating that? Well, firstly, and this is a trick I love to do, which I got from Mr. Tim Palmer, who you may know from U2 and Tears for Fears and a bunch of other great records that he made and mixed and all kinds of fun stuff. Listen to the bass DI on its own. So it's a nice controlled low end. So I'm using a stock plugin here, and this stock plugin is set to 170, about 172 hertz, and everything above that is low passed away. So it's only letting the low end. Actually, after that is another EQ, which is at about 60, 58, and it's sloping. So it's controlling that low end. If I take it off, here's the DI. Just a floppy kind of, put it back on. So it's all low end. So I've got the DI all low end. If I go over to the amp over here, let's have a listen to the amp without any plugins on it at all. So it's totally flat. I've got the same EQ crossover point, and guess what? I'm high passing it. Say it ain't so. Yes, it is so. I'm high passing it. So why am I doing this? Well, firstly, a DI, generally speaking, with a few exceptions, generally is much cleaner sounding than a bass amp. Bass amps, especially the bass amps I like, tend to be tube, valve, as we say in England, and they distort. And they kind of give you some crunch, and the speaker maybe is on the edge of breaking up. Great things, loads of personality, but unfortunately don't usually give us the cleanest low end. So I take the bass amp and use it for definition. So with that EQ on, wiping off the low end, and then with the DI with the low end reintroduced, you get this. You get a nice controlled low end. This is a great example where taking multiple sources and EQing them differently, then busting them together works really well. Works great on kick drums, it works great on bass amps. There are people that will tell you otherwise. However, this is how everybody I know does it. Everybody I respect, you know, all the great mixers like Neil Avron, Mark Ender, all of those guys are fantastic mixers. This is how they work. Okay, and of course Tim Palmer, where I stole this trick from. So this last one here is just for schnitz and schniggles, and I'm wiping off the low end, and it's a Sans amp. And it's just totally destroyed. Put the 3 together. You've still got all the bass, DI, providing all the low end. Take it away. Nothing. Put it back in. So it's great. So the reason why we do this is to get proper phase, proper polarity. Now, there's a lot of myths with high passing, a lot of misinformation out there. The reason why we high pass is when you only have one source creating low end of certain frequencies, it is much cleaner and much more likely to fill a void. So when you take like 2 or 3 elements of a bass guitar or 2 or 3 elements of a kick drum, if you separate the elements into different EQ areas, you'll get better low end. Because if I take like 2 or 3 kick drums and have them all going flat against each other, there'll be some cancellation of a low end. You won't get bigger low end, you won't get more balls, as I've heard. You'll actually get phase cancellation and it will sound like mud. However, you can see here, really good low end, clean low end. If I take everything off, horrible. So that's now all flat. Put it back on, much better, cleaner low end, real punchy, boom, boom. So you can see why high passing works. So this is a combination of high passing and low passing. I'll go through it one more time because I really want everyone to get this. So on my bass DI, I have low passed at about 172. On my bass amp, I've high passed at about 172. So now they're out of the way of each other. And also on the DI duplicated, I put a Sans amp on and also high passed at 172. So basically these two elements, the DI with the Sans amp and the bass amp, give me the personality that I want, and the low end comes from one source, from the DI. Moving on, here we have an electric guitar. Which is, I've actually EQ'd quite aggressively here on the high end. Take it off. Little nosy, little muddy. So it's quite, it's just a boost here. You can see that I've done here. And I've got like, you know, nearly 5 dB at 5.5K. However, there's times when it feels a little painful. I like what it's generally doing, but occasionally it gets a little too aggressive. So we're boosting it the way we want. We've also, yes, high passed here. I'll take it off again. High pass. See, the high pass, when I enact the high pass, it gives me a little bit more detail for the bass. So now I hear more definition from the bass because I don't have that low end on the guitar fighting with the low end on the bass. There's a little bit of space in there. But I don't miss it, because particularly in this particular part, because the bass player's playing super busy. So what am I going to do? Okay, I like the guitar. It just gets a little too bright in places, but not all the time. Generally, I like the boost. So let's get out, you guessed it, a de-esser. So we boosted it, but now I'm going to go and grab just a good old-fashioned de-esser and control it. So it's mainly okay, but if I just bring it here, it's just toning it in a bit. So what is the lesson with this EQing? Well, I want this, I do this all the time. I do it with vocals, I do it with guitars, I do it with anything where I want it to be brighter, but I want to control it. Talking to Gavin Lurson, the mastering engineer, this is the kind of thing he does as well on masters. They brighten it and then use a little bit of de-essing, because it's effectively a high frequency multi-band compressor, and then just control it. So I boosted it, and then I'm controlling it here. So every now and then when it just gets a little too bright, sticks its nose out, the de-esser's doing it. So the trick is high passing, get it out of the way of the bass. Nice gentle slope here. I'm actually going quite high. It's 115, but it's a gentle slope. So at 115. Then I'm boosting it at 5.5K and low passing, but that boost is quite excessive. So to control it, I'm putting a de-esser after. So boosting, EQ, and then controlling excessive boost so it's more even with the de-esser. Number 3, we're going to go to the kick drum. Now this has no samples on it, this song. This is a song that I've got up that I've actually did a full course on, and it's totally live. See what I did? This is insane. Insane. In solo, that is the worst sounding schnizzle I've ever heard in my entire life. Absolutely horrific. What I found was, listening to this D112 that was recorded, it had this sort of double click. The whole album was done in one day, 10 songs recorded live. It's a great album, it's done really well, God bless it. But when I came to mix this in the box for this course, I found that I could not get the kick drum to sound the way I wanted it to in the box until I got really crazy. So I have gone absolutely nuts on this. You can leave me 1,000 comments below, but in solo, this is how it sounds. Yep. Now the other element here, together. And the thing is, solo, it's not that pleasant, but I put the whole thing in the drums. Makes sense. We don't listen to music in solo. So what did I do? Well, a couple of crazy things. So on this one, absolutely insane stuff. I just boosted the high end like crazy. And then I actually ran a compressor just to control that. And more high boost. There's absolutely it's all completely high passed. Absolutely no low end in this at all. Now, so what am I doing? I'm taking two independent elements and treating them, EQing them differently, then bussing them together. Yes, I know. There are people that say you shouldn't do that. Well, unfortunately, most of us do. So then I went crazy on this kick drum, really excessive EQ. Low end boost, then mid-range cut, a load of mid-range cut, and then more high-end boost here. And that's basically the two elements. The two elements are put together. So don't be afraid, do not be afraid to get crazy, especially on the low end, because what will happen is when you've got like bass guitars or kick drums or anything that has multiple sources for low end, 2 or 3 mics or a DI and a mic, when you get 2 or 3 low end things together, you'll get quite bad cancellation. So if you look here, let's zoom in quite heavily here. Okay, if you look here, here's the front of this. Doesn't line up. It's a little bit out, but it's not terrible. But then see as it progresses, does that make sense? See how far out it starts to get. And I don't care what you do, you'll never get that phase correlation to be exact. You just never will. So when you have multiple sources of low end, they're already at different points away from the kick drum. One's inside, one's outside. Sometimes there's a third mic even further out. And with that, they all hear the low end in different ways. So if you don't sculpt the low end out before you combine it to one source, you'll get tons and tons of low end cancellation. That's why high passing is your friend and using multiple sources to fulfill different things. Bob Marlette is a genius at this. He'll take a kick drum and just take it into little pieces, put it together, and it's the biggest kick drum you've ever heard. Now, honestly, this is not a pretty kick drum. It's not pretty, but in context of the mix, works great. I could have put a sample against that, and it's very tempting to put a kick sample against that and just kind of like beef it up just a little bit. But the whole idea of this mixing in a box, the classic rock one, was to avoid doing that and just use those elements and use stock plugins as much as possible. Okay, that was numéro 3, the kick drum. All right, 4th. Now this is just something to be really aware of when mixing, especially drums or rock and roll in general. When you're working with EDM or virtual instruments, they're recorded exceptionally well. And not only are they recorded exceptionally well, they're recorded in an environment where, you know, it's a piano recorded one note at a time for a virtual instrument playback or whatever, exceptionally controlled. But when with live players, especially drummers, there's going to be huge dynamics and a lot of build-up. And what we've got in this room, if you have a listen, is this kind of like darkness. So I've compressed it. I've added a little bit of lo-fi to distort. You know what I like to do, just to distort some of the high end so it doesn't get too washy. But this is a big one. I've also put some room on it, even more verb. But look what I did on the EQ here. So on the EQ, I have high passed it quite heavily, because if you've got room mics pulled back a long way away from the rest of your drums, if you don't go in there and high pass those room mics, you're going to get double hits on the kicks in particular. It's not going to sound bigger, it's just going to go blah, blah, blah. And once again, having multiple sources of low end coming from different areas will cause you all kinds of mud and phase issues. So I've gone in there at 350 and I've pulled it out, all that low mid build up. And I've also, as you can see, high passed at 179. So let's have a listen. Sounds exciting. Put the other room mics in, which have similar effect onto it. All of these room mics have got the low end taken out of them. So you can hear the thump of the kick, but I put the live kick in. That's with the live kick. So what you get is you get the you get the low end of the kick, and then you get the ambience around it, the comes from the room mics, which is what they're there for. That's what the room mics are there for. So it's just a quick illustration as why we high pass, why all professionals high passed, is if we take off the EQ, it sounds all floppy in that low end. Put it back on, much more control. So there is a reality why people high pass. It's like it doesn't give you more low end, it just gives you muddy, out of phase, no definition. And one of the biggest discussions we've been having is with mastering engineers is that they're finding they're getting stuff where there's no definition. They don't know how to pull out 40 to 60 hertz of a kick because they pull that out and all the guitars come up and all these like random mics and stuff like that. That's why you need to get into high passing and knowing when to do it and how to do it. So low mid cut is a wonder because you get tons of low mid. Low mids are in pretty much everything. I mean, even a mandolin has a little bit of low mid in it, believe it or not. There's a buildup of low mid. So when you get multiple amounts of instruments, room mics in this instance, bass guitars, electric guitars, be very conscious of that sort of 250 to 400 area gets really, really crowded. And you'll find a lot of guys on their mix bus will pull out like a 300 or so. Or they'll boost some 60 and boost some mid-range and above, effectively doing the same thing. So low mids, try to cut them as much as you can, not necessarily drastically or everything, but be very aware that they will build up very quickly. Okay, EQing your reverb. This is a good one. So I've got a kick reverb going. So let's take our two kick elements and listen to them. And you hear there's some verb. So what am I doing? See what I'm doing? I'm high passing going into the kick drum. I could also actually, frankly, low pass it around about here. Now this is an old Abbey Road trick. They use an EQ curve a little bit like this, high and low passing filters going into their reverbs, their room verbs, their actual real ones. And the reason for that is the same thing. If I get a kick drum and it's pushing out a lot of 40 to 60 hertz and I pump it out, there's going to be a huge build up in the low end reverberating. So EQ going into reverb is really, really. Take it off. Listen to that, it's terrible. Listen to the kick drums going blah, blah, blah. Another reason for good high passing. Horrible build up. Still got the ambience, but you don't have that low end pumping. One more time. Take off the EQ. Just a horrible low rumble. I throw a bass guitar in there and it's just going to be like an undefined bunch of low end rumble. So you need to high pass. There I'm quite drastic. There I've gone up to 230 high passing on a reverb. High pass, no high pass. Absolute mess. So be very careful. High passing is really, really important. Use it properly, know when to use it. And low passing as well, because I don't need that super, super high on the kick drums. That's just going to get in the way of the cymbals, the high end of the vocal, snare drum, all this kind of stuff. We can do a similar thing. Let's try it quickly while we're here on our reverb. So, you know what, I'm going to do something similar. I'm just going to go to about 100. maybe a little bit higher, get it out of the way of the bass guitar. Let's go a little further into the song. Take it off. That's not as big of a deal. It's more precautionary. That's why sometimes high passing can be precautionary, because there's stuff that's like small amounts of low rumble that are going to get in your way. It's not even in the fundamental signal of the snare drum, but there might be a little bit of a build-up of it. So you put that over, 40 tracks, then you're going to get a bit of a mess in there. So high passing is also very useful, even when it isn't perceptible on an individual instrument. Remember, on about 40 instruments, if you've got a lot of low-end build-up, it really can get in the way. Great, so that was 5 very quick tips. I think one of the main things to learn is like high and low passing can work in all kinds of situations. It can work for bass guitars, kick drums, reverbs. De-essing combined with high EQ boost is fantastic, not just on vocals, which is obvious, but also on guitars. So it's a really, really useful technique. You're going to brighten everything, but then you're going to control when it gets too excessive. So I hope you enjoyed that. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Please, as ever, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to be notified, leave a bunch of comments and questions below. Let me know how you EQ stuff. What are the basic things that you do that really will help your mix? Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.